Welcome to episode 19 of the Primary Complete podcast. In this episode, Matt, Steve, and Jeremy sit down with Josh Smith. Josh is from Statesville, North Carolina, where he is a Battalion Chief for the Statesville Fire Department. Josh is also the Secretary-Treasurer and the Political Director for the PFFPNC, the state organization under the International Association of Firefighters. He has dedicated the majority of his career championing firefighters' rights and fighting for legislation that not only helps Statesville firefighters, but for first responders all over North Carolina. Josh also received his doctorate and is the Fire Service Training Coordinator at Mitchell Community College. As always, we want to thank you for your continued support and feedback. Without further ado,
my name is Josh Smith, and I serve in a lot of different roles in the fire service. So I guess the most important is I'm a Battalion Chief in Statesville, North Carolina. I've been there, be 20 years in July. I started in a volunteer department in western North Carolina, pretty much as far northwest as you can get in Iredell County, about 45 minutes from Boone, and I'll get to that a little later. I am the political director for the Professional Firefighters and Paramedics of North Carolina. I've served on that board since 2010, so 11 years now. About 5 years ago, I was appointed by the then President Tom Brewer to political director, and our current president Scott Mullins has kept me in that role as well. I pretty much manage the policy portion of what we do in the PFFPNC and some of the campaign work. Scott has taken on a load of the campaign work as of late, which has been very, very helpful. I am the school director at Mitchell Community College, where I manage our training programs there. We do a lot of different things. We have a 2-year degree program. In my opinion, it's one of the best 2-year degree programs in the state. It's the least amount of hours, I guess you would say, to get your 2-year degree. I mainly help with the instruction and the coursework, and then David Bullins, who's the retired Statesville Fire Chief. In fact, he manages the 2-year degree side. And if you want to be a student there, you would contact him. But I manage a lot of the back end stuff there. But basically, in 62 credit hours, you can get a 2-year degree. It's a great program. 8-week courses, so it's great for firefighters with short attention spans.
Guilty.
Yeah. Most every firefighter is guilty of that. What else do I do? I also have a consulting company called Spark Communications, where I mainly work in the research space. So, an example would be, a town needs a bill or an understanding of a bill on how their fire service is comprised. There's 9 different ways in North Carolina that a fire department can be established, incorporated, set up, however you want to say it. And a lot of times there are difficulties in that. So I work in that space, also help do a lot of promotional processes. So I have done a ton of promotional processes and try to work in that area as much as possible. And mainly it's kind of a passion sort of thing. It's one of those things I saw in my own career. I finished number 1 on a Battalion Chief process and got passed over. And so I started really digging in to figure out what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And for the most part, we're doing a lot wrong, and you guys probably know that, in your own careers. I'll also teach. I am a state political training academy instructor for the International Association of Firefighters. So basically what I do there is teach campaign finance and campaign strategies for political candidates, and a lot of state associations would reach out to us for that kind of help. I've taught in New Hampshire and in other states around the U.S. So that's
the part you said that got my brain running. I assumed that promotional processes were individual. Like this department does this. Are you telling me that it's pretty standardized across, and there is kind of a hope for a more uniform future?
I don't know that I would. A hope might be a bridge too far, but I think there are certainly some best practices that have, that really have emerged through research and good folks looking at what does work and what makes sense. And I had a professor in college one time he was Korean, and he shared the story in class about how he became a professor. And the story goes pretty much like this. At age 14, they call you in, the government calls you in, and they say, sir, what would you like to do? And he says, well, I want to be a medical doctor. And they say, sir, you're entirely too dumb to be a medical doctor. However, you could work for the government. How's that sound? And your answer is yes, because there is no, no, maybe we'll go sweep floors, or maybe we'll, continue our passion. It's just simply not an option. And the way they reach that conclusion is they test them one day. They bring them in at like 12, and they basically give them an IQ test and an aptitude test and a psychological exam. And that's how they decide what you're going to be in Korea. And that sounds just like, super, depressing and suppressive. But the reality is exactly what we do in the fire service, right? You decide, hey, I want to make lieutenant. So you go take a test. And in one day, whatever happens on that day, however you score on the written exam, however you score on the interview, however you score on the interview, decides whether you're going to be promoted or not. It doesn't matter how many babies you saved, last week, or how many puppies you saved, or, how many millions and millions of dollars of property you saved. And so, to synthesize the gap there, that's what you really have to figure out, right? Is what do we really want to score, and how do we want to decide, how we promote. If that's ultimately what's best for your organization, that's okay. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's okay. But even if you are going to do it in that way, you need to make sure that you're testing for the qualities and abilities and knowledge that your organization's looking for and that your organization needs.
It sounds to me like the picture-perfect world of the promotional process would tie in what you were saying as far as the singular things that we test, the education aspect, the performance aspect, what we test all in that one day, and then combining that with experience, knowledge, and past accolades, and acceptance. What about acceptance through your own department people? That plays, in my world, that pays dividends. I don't want to sum it up and use something as simplistic as popularity, because it's more than that. You can be popular and still suck at your job.
Right.
But more or less, what are the other people? Would they work for you? And then that reflection, to me, pays more than how well you get test anxiety or whatever.
Sure. One of the things that have really emerged in the last few years, and a lot of departments prior to really the last 20 years. Our department, I believe, has done this for about 10 years. But psychological assessments. And psychological assessments seem, again, for firefighters, that just seems outrageous. Absolutely, there has to be a little something wrong with you, to want to run into burning buildings and do what we do for a living. But psychological exams have really been proven through data, through research, to work really for all types of organizations out there. But we do it in the U.S. military. We do it on the federal government side, and private industry certainly uses it. Everybody from Google to Amazon to if they're filling a high level position, you're going to get psychological tests, and these are things you've heard of in most cases, things like 360 assessments and Myers-Briggs and things like that. And again, we know they work, but implementation is also important. So, what are we? What really are our goals there? We think in the fire service, globally that we want folks to get along with each other because we have to live with each other all the time. Well, that's not necessarily the best idea. If all three of us agree on everything all the time, well, two of us are highly unnecessary.
Right.
So we have to figure out, an organization has to spend a tremendous amount of time to understand the quality of person they're looking for, the things that they feel are, important to their organization and important to that position.
Are you saying that psych eval needs to be kicked out or is being used inappropriately? Is that the thing that was like 600 and some questions?
We did when I was hired. We had a psych test before we were hired. It was 500 questions of more or less the same 5 questions asked 495 different ways. And
Right.
it's to me it's interpreted more as a consistency test than it is a psychological evaluation. But they've since done away with that. You didn't have to take that when you got hired, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. So what year did we get rid of that? So I'm 7. You're
I took that test in 09, but I got hired at 10.
10.
I took it in 03.
So somewhere later date of 2011. We've since got rid of it. Our new people don't have to do that anymore.
I don't think I am in the camp of doing that for entry level positions, mainly because in the fire service, as we know, we hire about 98% male, and the male brain's not fully developed till you're 25. So we're missing some people. There's some holes in some of those theories out there for sure. But for promotion, I think it's very important that we use an appropriate tool for the organization. But you can't a fire chief can't just give someone a psychological exam and say, "Oh, he did fine." There has to be a purpose for it.
Sure.
If for example, the Myers-Briggs is, I think, what most people are familiar with, right? This tells you if you're a leader or if you're, a intrinsic person or an external, person. It doesn't necessarily mean that we would exclude someone who doesn't, get the 4 letters in the right order. But the higher you go in the leadership in your fire department, the more important it is to really evaluate who am I looking for this position. If it is, for example, an accreditation manager position, right, or a data analyst position, the person who is very outgoing, it's likely not going to be a good fit for them. Now, if that person also happens to have a master's degree in statistics, well, maybe we need to think about that.
Right.
But I suspect that if 1,000 people took that Myers-Briggs test, you might have one who fit in that category.
Yeah.
So I think it is one of the things that we see with promotions right now is what the fire service plagues with in general, which is laziness. It's much easier for a fire chief who has a captain's opening to call a consulting company, give them $8,000, and they produce the candidate. Right? They spent 10 minutes to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when the real work has to be done before the job advertisement ever hits the web, it's got to be, what is that job description? What are the key things that this person needs? What does the future look like for the organization? What qualifications do I need them to have? And have I done my part in the organization to ensure that that Jeremy knows how to get promoted when he comes up through the ranks?
Yeah, I'm glad we started off this way.
Yeah.
Every firehouse has its collection spot, like 18 by the back door. If you go on any random day, you're probably going to find somebody there. 13's in the bay. Everybody.
Kitchen for us.
Yeah, I'm sure nationwide it's true. And the conversations that happen there, promotional processes, union, you join a union, you're not joining, why? What else? What are some of those other ones?
Dude, everything. There's been, there's been times where chiefs have come in, kicked us out of the kitchen in order to talk to somebody who was in the kitchen, but we had to leave, but they didn't want to change the setting. They didn't want it pulled into an office, or they didn't want it like that. They were like, can y'all give us a minute? And then we all have to leave, and they have to stay there.
Yeah, that psych eval, I can just hear one of those conversations, like, why do we have to take that? It's neat to hear your side of it. I've never been privileged to look at it from a chief level point of view, but it makes sense that it is a tool. I like your idea that it shouldn't be the tool or exclusive, but just an indicator.
That's right. Absolutely.
And also get on board with the fact that it's probably not the best idea for entry-level folks, but maybe as you are climbing through your promotional process, as you're climbing the ranks, I could see it playing a much more sufficient role there than somebody new off the street for a hiring aid.
Yeah, if you've made a reputation for yourself and then you take the psych eval, so the chief knows what you've been doing on the street, and then he kind of measures that against your Myers-Briggs or psych eval, whatever it is, that seems more valuable.
Yeah, well, and maybe to simplify it a little bit too. So think about, the very simplistic manner of how a 360 survey works is, you evaluate me, you're BC, and then, the boss evaluates me. And then we have external stakeholders that have, interest. That's EMS supervisors. That's a deputy sheriff. That's a captain in the police department. And then we have internal folks who that I'm not actually their, direct report. So I come in to do my my chief level, promotion. I'm going to be an assistant chief, say. Well, because I did, great on that one day, what other factors, should come into play? Well, that 360 survey will certainly show you that they have the ability, or do not have the ability, right, to work with folks inside the department, folks outside the department, the management, which, quite frankly, is much more important long term. Not only how I'm going to perform in that position, but my ability to move up, or my ability to fill in as the fire chief. If the fire chief is, gets hit by a bus, or, retires, if you have a poor reputation amongst multiple external agencies, it's likely you, not them, right? Now, if one, captain in the police department puts a whole bunch of negative stuff on there, probably, maybe you messed around with his wife or something like that.
Probably just personal. It's probably just personal, but collectively.
But you have five folks who say, this guy's very, very difficult to get along with, and maybe one of your roles in that position is collaboration and partnership building with other agencies. It's probably not going to be a good fit.
So this is called a 360 survey?
Mm-hmm. 360 feedback.
It's not the first time I've heard this term, and it's not just from him, but I've heard this within our organization. I don't know if you have or not.
I haven't. I was today years old when I found out.
Yeah. I've heard this within our organization as something they're trying to figure out, per se. A good friend of mine who's also a training captain, his wife, her company uses 360.
Yep.
So they're kind of trying to figure out how it works. And Hanover, we're still figuring this out. We're dealing with, NeoGov, self-evals, and it goes on and on and on and on. And it's just, we're very new to the whole evaluation process.
Yeah, NeoGov definitely doesn't fit, the fire service. We know that. We evaluated those products. Firefighters need, police officers, EMS folks, they need things like, performance under pressure, and, cooperation, amongst the ranks, and things that, are even task specific to some degree. So, if you're a driver, pump operator, engineer, whatever the position is, just because you cook lunch every day and get along with everybody doesn't mean that you can, pump the fire truck under a stressful situation. So things like that have to be looked at in some way. And NeoGov and Cornerstone, and there's others out there that very simply they just don't capture that information.
You mind if I ask him about the union thing?
No, of course not.
We were having lunch earlier, and I was like, man, it'd be a great opportunity. Hoffman's in the union. King is. I was at one time. I'm not now. I have warm thoughts about the union, and I enjoyed my time in. That's one of those conversations that, man, it happens behind every firehouse, and it's anytime anybody's having beers, that's, it's a pretty good chance it's going to come up too.
Right.
Let's talk about that, like the some of the myths, maybe.
Sure.
When I first got hired here, we were approached by a couple of union members, and it was a less than perfect sales pitch, so everybody had weird feelings, and that started mine. So I was kind of shouldered up early, and I kept that, and then after Ben Bob got in the seat, I was like, oh, this seems more approachable now, and then I've had good relationships with it. I met you doing the political stuff up in Raleigh, and I had a great time up there. What are some of the questions that get asked to you as far as like a benefit of why would somebody want to be a part of the group, or what are some of those questions that you get?
Well, so let me preface something by saying a couple of things, because I think it's important to know where I come from. So I am the vice president of the Professional Firefighters and Paramedics of North Carolina. I'm sorry, I'm the secretary-treasurer. I was trying to go bottom to top, and I messed that up. I'm the vice president of Statesville Professional Firefighters. So, and I've served in all different roles in my own local. And how I got started in the union business, first of all, in Statesville, it's kind of not very optional. We have the highest union density of all locals in North Carolina, 98%. So 83 guys in suppression. We have 2 guys who are not in. And then we're very quickly followed up by Asheville and Greensboro, who both have very, very high union density. And those are much larger departments, and it's much harder to maintain that. But they both unions do a fantastic job for their people. But my first assignment at the Statesville Fire Department was Station 1 C shift. And it was an all-union truck, and my driver was the president of the union at the time. And back then, we had 2 drivers at that station, and it was a holdover from when we had a tanker that had to go out to the country club because there were no hydrants out there. So we had a captain, 2 drivers, and 2 firefighters on this truck. The union president was very famous for he did not speak to a new recruit until they had been there 1 year. He was incredibly good at this. Now you could imagine spending 24 hours with somebody every day and not speaking a word to him. He was fantastic at it. And my goal was going to be, this dude's going to talk to me somehow. We're going to have a conversation.
Right.
And I mean, a little bit of myself in this.
He monopolized the remote, and the guy left. He left the fire department. His brother is a fantastic guy who works for Greensboro Fire and is a PFFPNC trustee and a captain for the city of Greensboro. But his brother was a very, very highly intelligent guy and our union president, and he went on to he runs part of a statistical management program in Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services, as crazy as that is. But he spent about 20 years in the fire service, another 2 or 3 in emergency management, and then went over to this job. But during my time, I did get him to talk to me, and we were able to bond on some things that were really outside the fire service and other interests that I had. And again, I was in the union, so he didn't have to sell me. But the more time I spent with him, I realized that it doesn't really matter. You can call it a union, you can call it an association, but real change doesn't happen unless you're together. He was not. If he took a 360 survey, it would come back very, very poorly for him in terms of cooperation and being able to work with people. That was not his skill set, but he was very much a leader, and he was a very smart person. And he was elected every year by 79 individuals who believed that he could pull us together to affect change in our organization. And I did not really equate what I was doing to the national labor movement or what goes on in the AFL-CIO or what goes on at the international level and what goes on politically. And so I think, for me, mine was very, very personal because I had intellectual conversations with him about organizational change, not about the union. I knew our organization had to change, and if the union had even even the slightest percentage of helping with that, it was worth my $25 a month.
Sure.
That was local level stuff. And then I got more involved with the local and trying to understand, why were we riding open cab trucks, right? This is something we should not be doing. I work in a very busy city. It's we've had paid firefighters in the city of Statesville since 1888. Very historic department. If you go back to the late 1700s, early 1800s, it had a black fire company and a white fire company. They used fire marks to distinguish whose house was whose. That's
the placard.
Yeah. Much like insurance companies use,
Mm-hmm.
Later to discern who has insurance and who doesn't, or what insurance company. So just a super fascinating place, but it was also a very, very conservative place. It still is very, very conservative. And I think, one of the things I figured out was that in order to make any sort of movement, you had to be politically active. And one of the very strong aspects of labor unions is they are very much set up for political action. They have the right tax codes. They have the mechanisms to build PAC funds. They have the resources through the international to be able to work in campaigns and work with elected leaders. And it's not a situation where it's just folks out doing whatever they want to do. It's a very structured, organized thing. So the more I got involved with that, I could really see the importance of that. And then to take a step back, at the same time, I was in the early stages of graduate school. So I was doing my master's in public administration and political science. So I was kind of dual majoring, and I worked on some campaigns in North Carolina, notably Virginia Fox, a very right wing representative from Western North Carolina. And I did that. I did not do that because of anything going on in the fire department. I did that out of my own curiosity, and I got like extra credit, right? So,
yeah.
So I was learning a new skill, and I got some personal benefit. So throughout this process, I really began to evaluate how do we affect change, how do we move people, and then how do we move our own council members. So one of the things that I did, early on at the local level was developed an issues book, and we still print these. I've brought these to show guys, and I've helped other locals develop these. But basically, it goes through all the issues and the changes that firefighters need. We give those to our council members every year. We use them as our backbone for political campaigning and for candidate endorsements. So, we bring our candidates in and we say, hey, you got a copy of the issues book. Tell me about it and tell me what you're going to do to fix our issues, because this is affecting our people and their families.
What are some examples of the things that are in the issues book?
We have went through. We had a big apparatus problem. They were kicking the can down the road way too long on apparatus replacement, to the point they were unsafe. We have since really been able to fix that problem. That has been one of our biggest accomplishments. We no longer have an apparatus on the front line that's over 10 years old. Most of ours are less than 5. And again, we did this through bootstrap work. We presented the issue to them in one of our issues books, and then we invited them. Worked with the fire chief, but we invited them to see one of our open cab trucks. Like, check this out. Would you want your 18-year-old son who just got hired by the fire department to ride on this? I mean, this is, and so we were able to definitely move them in the right direction on that, and we now have no open cab trucks in service anywhere, not even in reserve. Same thing with utility vehicles. We had utility vehicles that were unsafe, and we use them more, for other things now, rescue and other things. So we're pretty much, all flush across the board with that. Career development was a big deal. It took us probably about 6 years from start to finish on career development, but we now have a structure. So we have a firefighter 2, a master firefighter, then it goes lieutenant, then we have a master lieutenant, and then captain, battalion chief. And they all have requirements, credentials within those systems. We pretty much the system that was developed by our executive board and a working group. What we developed is what we have. It wasn't the money that we that we proposed, of course.
Yeah.
But it was close, and it was. We are certainly further along than had we waited on the fire chief or command staff to come up with a solution.
Is the issue book something that the union still uses on a state level?
We don't.
Not maybe specifically the issue book, but think in fielding this question, you're going to answer his question, which was, what are some of the most common reasons? And I would probably say why, or why would I want to join the union?
Right.
But this state level instigation stuff, or what we're trying to implement on the statewide stuff,
right,
is a good way to give them some easy one-word answers, or some simple phrase answers. But I like the idea of the issue book, and if that's something that we use on the state level, it makes a lot of sense. What are some things that we see on the state level that we're trying to address in the fire service specifically?
Yeah, the state level, so the professional firefighters and paramedics in North Carolina, our platform has been very similar for a long time, but it's important things. And so, presumptive cancer legislation, increased or a better retirement in some way, right? So we have several bills in right now, but they're somewhat similar to things we've done in the past, but the global issue is the same. We our retirement in North Carolina needs to be better in some way, so we have bills in that do that. PTSD coverage here in North Carolina has some gaps. We do have some coverage in North Carolina, and these are things that I worked on in 2010 2011 when then Representative Dale Falwell was still in the General Assembly. He's now the North Carolina Treasurer. But we were able to carve in some things during that time to help firefighters with PTSD. But there is a bill, and it's a bipartisan bill. It's also it's a joint bill with police and fire and EMS folks. Another big one is line of duty death coverage that we have continued to work on. We now have, and this has been an evolving process for a number of years, and quite honestly, it's one of those things that unfortunately it is reactive because something happens and we realize, oh, that person didn't have coverage and they really should have. And it's hard to predict and it's hard to understand, but we have increased that from 50,000 to 100,000. We've also added some cancers to that. So we now have four cancers that are covered by line of duty. We as a state organization try very much to work with the family so that they understand there are certain things that they need to work with their doctor on once it's imminent that that there's a high probability that their loved one's not going to make it. We also work with the Industrial Commission, to advocate for coverage for our fallen firefighters, whether it's cancer or whatever the case may be. And then another I would say important thing that we do is we certainly fend off attackers. This is the first long session. I've been lobbying for 10 years now. This is the first long session that we've had. North Carolina operates in bienniums, so we have a long session and a short session. Long session, for example, is this year. Short session is next year, but those 2 years combined make up one legislative session. So this is considered the long session. But this is the first long session that I have lobbied where we did not have a bill to eliminate our pension. It happens. It has happened every year I've lobbied since 2010. That's something I feel like people would be pretty interested in, right?
Why is that? What's the reasoning for wanting to take our pensions from us?
Money.
I get that, but do they want to reallocate it or?
Well, to kind of understand this, I have to tell a kind of a long story. But one thing that you have to remember about the North Carolina General Assembly is it is all kind of volunteer based. Like these guys make like $13,000 a year. We are, I want to say we are like 46th or something in pay for our General Assembly members. And the basic gist of it is, if you're going to be in the General Assembly, you're likely going to be wealthy or you're going to be a retired public employee. So typically when these bills come up, these are General Assembly members who own private companies, most likely, where pensions are not a thing, or they've had an issue with pension in the past, and they just believe inherently that pensions are bad. They don't look at the pros of pension plans, and there are for government work and for North Carolina, the pros are astronomical. One of which is North Carolina is AAA bonded, so the government can borrow money for itself at almost 0% right now. Right, that's a huge deal when you're doing billion and trillion dollar infrastructure programs. The other, of course, is recruitment, retention of state and local level employees. And so you have all of these things, you have all of these benefits that most people don't, look at it and say that's important. I don't know that. And some of it is, quite frankly, it's just malicious in nature. So you have malicious or political, right? We're going to take the teacher's pension away, and sorry, you're you're just you're a pawn in that plan. So
Yeah. I helped in 2017 and 18. We were doing cancer bills. We were trying for the 25-year retirement.
Yep.
And one of the arguments, one of the points of contention was trying to explain if you let these guys at the 25 to 30 year retire, then you're recruiting fresh new people that you're paying less. So there was a financial benefit to it as well. I guess my point being, I didn't get paid anything to go up there. I was a union member, felt passionate about it, I wanted to help. There was several of us. I can't remember. King, were you there? Yeah. And if I'm the guy in the back of the firehouse asking why should I be a part of this, there's passionate people that are putting in effort to fight for these cancer bills and to help with this retirement. There's definitely a lot of benefits. Sadly, you ever heard the term perception is reality?
yeah, sure.
Yeah. So those are the things that don't get just street talk. Like nobody's hanging around the back of the house talking about cancer bill 100 and whatever, that if I knew that earlier on, that might have been something that leaned me toward joining sooner. There's a perception out there that politics and union work is bad, and I might have jumped the gun when I pulled away. I did it over politics. I was mad.
Yeah.
But sitting here talking about it, we've talked for so long about the good, and then I'll bring up the bad. And the reason people are behind firehouses talking about this stuff.
Sure.
When a presidential election comes along,
Sure.
and then at the level way above any of us, they throw support one way or the other. I learned that they were going to do that, and I was like, why get involved? Like I had all my personal opinions, and honorably, either way, I don't want them to get involved at that level. It's above my pay grade. I might not even understand some of the whys, but the perception at the local level, the guy behind the firehouse just talking to everybody else, how can we fix that? How can we take away the power from that?
Well, what I would say about the political conversation is that I often think, and I don't want to pick on you.
No, go for it. Yeah.
But I often think that it's mainly an excuse. In most cases. Now, are there people who just absolutely, their personal belief is they can't stomach it, or they have an issue, or they're not going to be a part of an organization that supports a party? Yeah, that happens. But I think on the aggregate, most people don't even understand enough about politics to make that decision.
I'm guilty of it.
Now, how many I use this on my own local quite a bit when we have these conversations. We had a fantastic representative who is now retired, but she was a school teacher. She was then our clerk of court. Now, why is that important? Well, in Statesville, our clerk of court chooses our civil service members. So she would call Jeremy King and say, Jeremy, would you like to serve? Now, occasionally, she would call us and say, who should I call, right? Big deal. Well, she received a seat. She's a Republican, by the way. In Iredell County, votes 78% Republican almost since 1975, without question. She received a C- by the NRA. Big deal. Right, I'd say we have almost as many NRA members as we have union members, right? Mm-hmm. So a big deal in my local. Well, what is she doing? Well, she was basically tied to. She wanted some regulation in schools on distances. That you could have firearms. And this was something that someone came to her with because she was a school teacher, not because she was a Republican or a Democrat, right? Now, she later, 2 years later, she helped some private schools in our county get a waiver where they could hold concealed carry classes on campus as long as school wasn't in session. So she's not anti-gun. She just was not where the NRA thought she should be on this issue. And so, you know, the Biden thing is where you hear the most pushback. I'm not going to defend that. I'm a Republican, so I'm not going to even go down the road of whether that's right or wrong, or whether we should endorse at that level, or whether we should not, or whether we're making an impact, or whether we're not. But I know that there are 12 people right now on Statesville fire trucks that are recipients. We have a 4-man ladder every single day minimum because of the SAFER grant, and that's legislation that Joseph Biden sponsored. So how can you as a firefighter who says I care about safety and I care about others, how can you be against somebody who has sponsored that? Now, you may not vote for him, or you may not like him, but how do you have the conversation with the international that it's wrong for them to sponsor somebody who has year after year championed the AFG grant that provides us with service and with equipment that keeps us safe, that has continued to champion the SAFER grant since 9/11, worked with George W. Bush personally to champion the SAFER grant?
Yeah. You know, that perception is reality part. So probably 100% of firemen have 10 reasons why they would vote for somebody. Like a presidential election comes up, or a union president, like whatever choices. It's never one thing, right? It's you weigh it out. Like that's what sleeping on something means, or going through that. Whether we like Uncle Joe or not, like that part, I don't think it matters for somebody that was like me. I'll say that I take those elections super seriously. Like I understand the election process and I understand what people stand for. And I never hate on any politician. I don't agree with anybody 100%.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I think there's more of us that are actually paying attention and do get upset about the Uncle Joe thing. It wasn't just Uncle Joe. Remember the Hillary Trump? They chose to stay out of it.
Yep.
That was a victory. I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Just back out of it. I'm not telling anybody what to do. The perception is what I'm hoping. Right now you're losing, and what I'm saying is your response, like the maybe we just don't understand it. That's not going to win behind the firehouse. Let's try it again, and let's do one. I'm not saying we're going to edit it out, but there's got to be a better reason, because I want to rejoin, and I want to get past that whole Biden thing. There's got to be a reason there, like a good. All right, I can feel good about this.
Well, I think I can give you a reason that may help. It's their job. So we have an entire political division. They're in D.C. today,
yeah.
And these aren't. When I say that, these aren't malicious left-wing operatives. These are policy people.
Yeah.
Who are looking at things like FSLA and pensions and how our pensions are structured. And they're evaluating things like COVID-19 and how our people are affected. They're looking at PTSD across the U.S. Our cancer bill that we have in North Carolina right now came from the IFF. It's pretty much strictly the one that was passed in Florida and Georgia in right wing leaning and states. That's the kind of support that we get from the international. They're doing the same things on the national level that we're doing on the state and local level. They're trying to figure out how can we help the most firefighters that we can. And if that is politically supporting a certain candidate, that's what they're going to do, and that's what they're going to recommend. No different than the NRA sent a C- to one of my favorite legislators,
Right.
who has doesn't even know it, but indirectly helped firefighters since she got in office. It is certainly a political choice, and it's a choice of the local, by the way. You saw locals all over the U.S. and large locals that endorsed Donald Trump. That's okay. You can do that.
Yeah, I wish they wouldn't have done that either. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think if we're going to do something, we do it together.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the international works on an autonomy program where we're not going to tell the locals what to do. You guys have your own process. They prefer you to, stay local, stay local, and we'll help you all we can. Now, what I will say about the left and right situation is the international supports a lot of Republicans. And they probably don't highlight that as much as they should. But I suspect, and I know there is, if you were to look at their scorecard, and I'm sure there's one out there, they are very, very, well, bipartisan is a stretch, but they very much support those that are supporting firefighters, and that has long been the practice of the international.
Yeah. When we went to Raleigh, that was one of the things. I think it was you that taught me was we're not going and talking to these people from a standpoint of we're trying to push one side or the other. We're just looking for what's good for the health of firemen. Like cancer is not Democrat, Republican. Mm-hmm. A good retirement policy is not Democrat, Republican. So when we were up there doing that felt right. Like we're just going after what's good for the boys.
Yeah, the international has, and I can't say specifics, but the international has given a lot of money to Republicans in North Carolina at the state level. This has been work that, we have done with the international to educate them on our situation here in North Carolina. This has been real-time ask of, it didn't work, but down the stretch in the last long session, we gave a Republican in North Carolina a significant amount of money that we got from the international, all for the hopes that it would push our separation allowance bill over the top. It was a failed effort. And, I think that, what I would say about getting in or getting out, I never questioned it, so I don't know that I have that sort of, idea that, if the international supported a political party that I don't think I would ever consider getting out of the international because they chose to support a political candidate or not. Mainly because I really believe that the leadership of the international and the leadership of the PFFPNC, and you guys know most of the board at the PFFPNC level, and the leadership in my own local, even if they made that decision, they're not going to take it lightly, and it may be a mistake, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't support the cause. The NRA, in my opinion, made a mistake on my representative, but I wouldn't encourage people to get out of the NRA because of it. I think that over time, it took me a long time to get to that place where, it happens in every organization, but mistakes are made. And, my fire chief makes mistakes all the time, but I'm not going to quit my job.
Yeah.
Things can be done better, and that's why we continue to work hard. The new international president, he's creating a more transparent process for PAC donations. In fact, we had a call this morning on there was some money out there that he wanted to give to a certain group, and because of the way some things went in the last long session, we said, no, we're not doing that. We're absolutely not. We're not authorizing that, and he very simply said okay. And I don't want to talk much about it, but what I'll just quickly say is that the new IFF administration, which officially took office in March of this year, or maybe April 9th or 1st or something, but very recently, they are working diligently to make a more transparent political process. Is that going to fix the issue of endorsements for presidential elections? Nah, probably not. They go through the same shit in Canada, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we don't hear nothing about it.
Yeah.
We hear absolutely nothing about it. Do I think it is right or wrong to endorse in a presidential election? I think when someone has done as much for the fire service as Joe Biden has, it is tough to set it out. And it doesn't matter what office he's running for.
Sure.
That's tough. If you've been with him in every House and Senate race, and he comes up and says, "I've been your champion for 40 years," saying no kind of makes you look like an asshole. And I can tell you the history very quickly about the Trump Hillary race. They did survey. We do hear this, especially when I teach on the international level for the Political Training Academy. Well, why did they set it out? Well, they very simply set it out because they did survey the members. They did one of the most expensive internal polling that the International's ever done. It cost us a lot of money. And we literally polled firefighters from every single state in the U.S. And, basically the survey came back kind of 50-50. We can't make up our mind here. Mm-hmm. And it was more, and most people won't believe when I say this, but it was more about the hesitancy to endorse Clinton than it was anti-Trump. It was never anti-Trump. Now, the D.C. folks do have some anti-Trump thoughts, or the D.C. folks that were there, mainly because of working with him in and around D.C. Nothing to do with national politics or what he would do for firefighters. Mm-hmm. But they also knew enough about Hillary to want to stay away as well. And the other thing that probably gets overlooked that is very, very important is, what do you think they did with all that money we normally pour into presidential elections? The GP spread it out. So it went into states, into House races, and into mayor's races. And we were in some big cities like San Antonio and Houston and San Francisco, and places where we had anti-friendly mayors that affected a lot of firefighters. They put money into the governor's race here in North Carolina. They put money into House races here in North Carolina.
I'll give you the reason why I left, and the reason why I'm sitting here today. I'm wanting to push my support back in. I see all of the good, and that one thing that messed that up for me was probably an overreaction on my part. I didn't appreciate it, and I'll tell you why. When we were going up there to Raleigh and talking, building relationships with the representatives, it was based on that. We're not Democrat, we're not Republican. We're just about what's good for firefighters. And when I saw that post go out, the support, I was like, well, damn, that kind of makes me a liar. And that was my perception. I don't know if that's technically true or not. They probably totally understood because of what you're saying, that they had supported him through the asshole not to support him, right?
Sure.
So I totally get it. That one decision, it was big. That's pretty high level, hit all the news, right?
Sure.
But it doesn't. It should not affect all of the other good, the cancer, the retirement. There's a lot of good, and so I'll be putting my name back in. But that reason why I left, it was common. I wasn't the only guy, right?
No. Now, what I will say, interestingly, not North Carolina specifically, but nationwide, the International is one of the, and at one time, the fastest growing public sector unions in the U.S. When I got in the union, we were slightly over 200,000. We're about 330 now, 330,000 strong across the U.S. About 90% of the U.S.'s firefighting force are IFF members.
What was that percent again?
It's about 90%. They do not take that position lightly. You know, they do a ton of things that are, you know, super important that people don't even realize, such as the IFF almost exclusively manages the hazmat grants for the United States. North Carolina doesn't recognize their program, but almost every other state does. You need a hazmat tech program, you call the International, they come to your state and teach it for you, free.
Yeah.
There are things like that that go, you know, very much unlooked at here in North Carolina.
Peer support,
big deal, big deal. Disaster relief, big here on the coast. And these are ancillary programs. These are programs, if you want the truth about it, these are programs that, this is my belief, not the International's belief, but these are programs that are making up for where the government fails.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the government done for first responder PTSD in this country? Best I can tell, not a damn thing. Right? So the International said, I'm going to go out and we're going to fix this. We started a peer support program. We have a program now where, you know, if a firefighter has substance abuse issues or suicidal thoughts or things like that, we have a Center for Excellence for them. We have folks locked and ready to help you ensure that insurance will cover your stay. This is a firefighter facility that it looks like a firehouse. It has a kitchen table. It has all the things that we expect. It has a basketball court and a tennis court and, you know, things, workout facilities. And there's a program called Fire Ops 101 that we use for politicians. So it's a live fire scenario. It's a rescue scenario. It's all the things that we think are difficult. So the politicians have to put on gear and they have to do all this thing to get a but the folks that work at the Excellence Center also go through fire ops, so they know that, you know, your job is not easy. Disaster relief, again, no one, government, FEMA, whoever, taking care of civilians, but who's taking care of the firefighters that are taking care of the civilians, and that's what the disaster, you know, relief program is all about.
For that, around the back of the firehouse conversation that I keep going back to, if you had your feelings hurt over the Biden thing, balance it with the peer support thing. Like that's way heavier. Like that means
and
so
the
much more.
disaster relief stuff for us around here.
That's right. Yeah, that's far more.
I was a direct benefit of that. That was fantastic when those guys rolled in from New York with the heart, and they had to like traverse floodwaters because we were still isolated. And man, those guys showed up at my house, and the DVP for the IFF 4th District, Andy
Patelis.
Yep, he came to my house, handed me a gift card. Those guys tarped my roof, and yeah, they were fantastic.
Yeah, gave you a $500 gift card,
Yep.
and yeah, and so those are areas where basically, you know, the backbone, honestly, of the International is their work they do in the government and politics and political affairs, and that's really hard, I think, for firefighters to wrap their minds around. And I have a different background and a much different perspective than most firefighters, but just because of things I've done outside of the fire service. But most firefighters don't have that, and so they think about the international, sometimes, unfortunately, as, the group that gives you the cool sticker that I'm a professional firefighter, and not what really goes on, inside that building that is very close to the White House, by the way. It is one of the closest buildings to the White House that exist. They work very, very hard to ensure that the policies that they are pushing for and advocating for are going to help its 330,000 members, and that's North Carolinians included. And that's a very difficult thing when you think about this idea of being involved in politics and public servants being involved in politics. And there's lots of groups that get a bad rap, teachers most notably. But then again, you think about that on a big level. Would I go teach kindergarten for $32,000 a year? Not in a damn minute. And so we have to, kind of step back and remember their job is national level politics. Our job as the state e-board is state level politics. And your job here locally is local politics. And know that the work you do locally, that's the most impactful that you can do for your members. We've been working 2 years on a pay study in our local. Our folks are getting ready to get an average raise of 12%, and that's life changing, right, for these guys. These are firefighters getting about $400 a month extra. These are battalion chiefs getting $800 and $900 extra. This is a big deal. It's much bigger than it's much bigger than whatever the hell Biden's doing at the G8 and G7 summit right now.
Right.
Because the reality is, 3 years Biden will be gone, or maybe 7. But these guys will still be in North Carolina working as firefighters. And so what we can do to help them, and same thing at the state level, what we can do, to help them at the state level. If we don't do anything else but ensure that our firefighters have a pension when they leave this job, what we do is very, very important. And I think sometimes, what we get into is the tactics. Supporting a presidential candidate, that's a tactic.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a strategy. It's really a tactic. Like there are policies that the international is working on that they know their best individual tactic for getting that accomplished is having a labor-friendly president. It's that simple. It's not, quite
playing
frankly,
the game.
They don't care.
Yeah,
the international doesn't evaluate what somebody, what a candidate thinks about abortion. That's not on the questionnaire, right? That is for other groups. Mm-hmm. That's for the Catholic Church, and that's for the, whatever that group is. Mothers Against something or other. But that's just not their. It's not, and it's not. It's never going to be their focus.
Is there anything else you want to talk about, Josh?
Yeah.
My whole purpose of getting you on here was for you to shine some light on what the union does.
Yeah.
What the union does. On a political level and so on and so on is such a beneficial thing for us firemen. And like you've stated over and over again, the work that actually gets done that makes a difference. Street level guys will never know about it unless you take the initiative to involve yourself in it. We don't know. Mm-hmm. Ben Bob, our president's excellent at pushing out newsletters and kind of letting us know what all's going on. But I'm guilty of it. I don't open all those, and I'm just one person. There's
right.
plenty that do it. And then on a national level, it's probably even less engagement from
mm-hmm.
street level guys. So it's nice to hear what's happening, because somebody asked me what they did internationally. I might be able to give them about 2 things, but you can get on here and explain that so much better than I ever could.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think globally it is a big ecosystem, and it's hard. It's very hard for people to understand. All the different check boxes, that exist, and you're getting a ton. You're getting a ton of benefit for your $25, $30, $35 a month, whatever your local pays. union dues in a lot of states are pretty hefty. Some as much as $125 a month. But they have a lot of work to do. They have a lot of things. They have a lot of different layers. If you're, for example, if you're the political director for the New York General Assembly, you got a lot of work to do up there. It's a big organization to kind of manage and go see all the different people. So I think that here in North Carolina we're going to continue to grow. Union membership is going to continue to grow. We have some work to do with internal organizing. We have some locals out there right now who need some help, probably need some new leadership, some fresh ideas. But I couldn't see myself working in this service, without being a union member. And really, from what I've seen, we are the professional firefighters are the only group advocating for these things. And so when you look at it in that light, it's a big deal. We do have, we do have board seats. Scott Mullins and I are both on the Fire and Rescue Commission, which is helpful, professional credentialing and things we do in the fire service. I sit on the retirement board for the state. I also sit on the North Carolina Certification Board. And these are, most of these are positions that have been granted to us through, political action in some way, and either directly or indirectly. And these are direct access, that our members have to, the boards that govern their fire service, and so that's a very important avenue.
And something you said just then is pretty heavy. Who else is showing up to lobby and to help and to try to get some of these things?
Yeah, that's it. And we have a long way to go in North Carolina. One of the things I tell people, and I'll be very upfront, that this is not very well received in a lot of spaces, but we hear it all the time. Well, this is the greatest job in the world. It's the greatest job in the world. I bet I hear that 100 times a week from firefighters. And I've seen my phone out of the corner of my eye blowing up. I probably got 20 calls to return by the time I get done with this. But here in North Carolina, you're 46th in pay, right? Depending on what you look at, somewhere between 43 and 47. You have guys committing suicide at an astronomical rate, 10 times what it was 10 years ago. You have guys dying of cancer with very, very little support. You're one of only 8 states in the U.S. that does not carve out police and fire and EMS as a separate retirement, subgroup, so that you can kind of control your retirement benefits and your things like 25-year retirement or higher multipliers, which is very, very important for our firefighters. And my belief is that we, as a service, have some of the greatest people and some of the smartest people, and we provide one of the most important services that exists in a local community. But to say it's the best is tough, and it hamstrings the fire service a lot of times. Even when I interact with legislators, they have this perception that we're just having fun, and we're going to 2 cookouts and a sleepover, and then guess what? We get to go to our second or third job because we can't afford to feed our families. And so this idea, is very, very difficult to sort of change public perception, where we don't just need your thank yous and your handshakes at parades. We need your advocacy. We need you to be passionate about, your fire station and your local community and how important it is, to keep it there. and we know this, right? We know volunteerism is going away. And I am in no way anti-volunteer. I started in a volunteer company, and I served there long after I moved out of the community in lots of different capacities. But the reality is volunteerism is going away. And when you look at some of the things around the state that's out there, it's not for the reasons that are being stated. The biggest reason is wages in the U.S. are down. 70%, give or take, of Americans have a side hustle in some way. Almost every firefighter has one, right?
You have to.
So with those statistics alone, how does someone have time to volunteer?
Hoffman said something the other night that might be your answer for the why people say it's the greatest job ever. Hoffman will ask me, like, hey, how are things going? That first answer, greatest job ever, then ask it again.
Right.
If you ask somebody 3 times, do you really think it's the best job ever? And then they start to calculate okay, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's cost us a lot. On the community college side, one example I've given in the past is firefighters are just inherently known for, we'll figure it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like most community colleges that, there's 58 of them in North Carolina, and they provide, a fantastic service for our fire service. But most of them, to conduct simple training, they have to borrow equipment from the local fire department. They got to borrow trucks. They got to, go into firehouses and use the firehouses' resources. Well, how did that practice start? Well, the simple answer is that we wanted to conduct training, so we figured it out. Well, now we can't get resources from the state, even though the resources are abundant, right?
Yeah.
There's so much money out there right now. It's insane. And so we compensate for these things, and we do things, we do things in our local community to fill a need, rather it be, car seat programs or bike helmet programs, or, putting together hazmat teams when we really don't have the means and resources to do so. Med calls are, quite frankly, they're almost a plague in North Carolina, and not from a sense of it's taxing on our folks, even though it is very taxing on our folks, but we don't have a mechanism, and in fact, it's illegal. If New Hanover County provides basic first responder programs, you can't bill that person, but every other organization can, right? The rescue squad, the EMS service that comes out, they can bill. You can't, right? So now we have an income gap that we've just accepted in the fire service, and it's wearing out our equipment, it's wearing out our people. And it's the problem's worse than ever with the opioid epidemic and all the things that are going on in the state. And so it's things like that we have to try to put in perspective, and we have to frame it in every way we know how. And that's political, that's internal advocacy with our relationship with our individual administrations, and that's our relationship with the public. What are those things? What are those things, and what methods are we doing to identify what our public needs and expects from us? And quite frankly, on some of those playing fields, there's avenues that the international has to help with those sorts of things. But med calls comes to mind, for example. But if you were to put 100 New Hanover, Wilmington civilians in a room and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? They would probably all say, yeah, we got to do that. We got to. It's important. And then you start listing off, what does it cost to run a call? What is the impact on the individual, firefighter? What is the impact on, the apparatus long term? What is the resiliency of that engine that's out on a med call? All right. You went feloniously to Miss Smith's house for came in as a hemorrhage, but it was a paper cut. And, Mike's house caught on fire, and we're, here. So what is our resiliency factor and reliability factor and how we respond? So all of that stuff, it fits together for a lot of room to say for me to say there is great people in the fire service, and I spend my days working with firefighters in all different capacities and all across the country. And every single thing that I do has been granted to me by someone else, except for my real job at the fire department. And I like to think I earned that. But everything else has been something that, my election of the PFFPNC board, I run for re-election coming up in this in November, and I intend to do that. And I'm appointed by the board as to the political director position. And again, these are things that you guys as members allow me to do, and I, very, very fortunate and thankful that you do that. But at the end of the day, I want to advocate. I want to advocate for the fire service. But the only way you mentioned motives earlier, the only way you can get to a real solution of a problem is what's the root cause of the problem, right? And in North Carolina, for the most part, our politicians don't respect firefighters, and they show that in their budgets, and they do it locally, and they do it state, and they take professionals, combination, and volunteers for granted uniformly. Mm-hmm. They don't discriminate, and I don't pull any punches about saying that because no one has ever proven me any different.
Right.
Yeah, we've been told here that we're a commodity, not a necessity.
Yeah, and that's a lot of communities, right? You don't bring in income, and so basically you cost them money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, you've been generous with your time. We appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
Yeah. Hope you got all your questions answered.
I think so. This was beneficial for me, and I think for a lot of those firehouse conversations.
Yeah, so. Great. Awesome.
Yeah, I learned a lot. That's why I sat here extremely quiet. That's abnormal of me.
Yeah, this is a
very abnormal for me to sit here quietly, but I'm intrigued. I was learning a lot. So yeah. But definitely, thank you, Josh, for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely, guys.
Right,
thank you.
Yep.